till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom. England have missed out on World Cup glory, losing the final to Spain 1-0. The Lionesses came agonisingly close to becoming the first England senior side to win the trophy since the men's team in 1966. The King praised their skill, determination and team spirit, and the Prime Minister said while it wasn't to be, they've already secured their legacy as game changers. Despite the loss, Jeannie Allett, a member of the original Lionesses team of 1972, still has high hopes for the future.
I think that whole of England is very emotional at the moment. It could have come home. Spain was just that little bit better, if I have to be honest. We should have just done take the chances what we had. It wasn't to be. It will come home eventually.
In other news, the British Medical Association is calling for hospital managers to be regulated in a similar way to medical staff. The call comes in the wake of Lucy Letby's conviction. The BMA says it's deeply worrying that consultants who repeatedly raised concerns about the former nurse weren't listened to. Letby, who was found guilty of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 others, has indicated she won't attend her sentencing tomorrow. Former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland says she should be forced to listen.
My suggestion had been to make sure that there was a live link beamed into the cell, either sound or sound and pictures, to ensure that Letby had nowhere to hide and that she, in effect, has to listen to what the judge is saying about the case. And most importantly, the victim personal statements, those impact statements that will really bring home, I think, to the wider world, the appalling, devastating impact of the loss of these innocent children, these innocent babies, have had upon dozens of families.
A new Brit school is set to open in Bradford in West Yorkshire. The government's confirmed it'll be based on the award-winning Performing Arts Brit School in South London. It helped launch the careers of some of Britain's best-known artists and actors, including Adele, Amy Winehouse and Tom Holland. Russia's Luna 25 spacecraft has crashed on the moon. A rocket carrying the craft launched on the 11th of August, the country in a space race against India, whose Chandrayaan-3 is due to land on the satellite's South Pole this week. This was Moscow's first mission to the moon in 47 years. The failed attempt is a blow to the country, which was hoping to return with the first samples of frozen water. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now it's time for Gloria Meets.
A very good morning to you. Welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood. I'm covering whilst Camilla is away, but this is the only politics show being broadcast on British television this morning, so don't go anywhere. We've got an enormous array of guests and some huge issues to get through. I'll be quizzing the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb, on a whole host of things, not least what the powers the Lucy Letby inquiry should have. Big discussions there as to whether this should be a statutory inquiry or not. And there's some interesting reasons behind the other issue there. We'll be digging into the details. I'll also be speaking to the former Justice Secretary, Sir Robert Buckland. Should Lucy Letby be forced to attend her sentencing hearing tomorrow? And can she be? She said that she's not going to turn up. Well, I'll also be speaking to one of the UK's richest men, the founder of Phones for You, John Caldwell. He's been a big donor to the Conservative Party in the past. He gave them £500,000 before the last election. Well, I'll be asking him whether he thinks the Conservatives are doing enough to support the business community or whether he's tempted by Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And this week we saw the amount of migrants arriving on small boats hit 25,000 since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. I'll be speaking to the man who was the head of professional standards for the Australian government's offshore processing scheme in Nauru. But now let's turn through the front pages. The Sunday Telegraph says doctors wage war on NHS managers after Letby. That's the Sunday Telegraph there. The Sunday Times, however, says killer Letby was offered role at top children's hospital after witch hunt. So sticking to a similar theme there. The Observer, of course, continues with the biggest story in town. Now investigate hospital bosses. Letby trial expert urges police. Lots to be getting stuck into there. And the Mail on Sunday says, now roar to victory, lionesses, by order of the King. That, of course, the other big story this morning. And on to the Sunday Express. Boats crisis, EU revenge for Brexit. That's what the former head of the UK Border Agency has said. And to the Sun on Sunday now, race row star quits Emmerdale. That's a little left field story. Of course, it talks about the football as well. But the Sunday Mirror, back to the Lionesses and their big game in Australia later today. Lionesses, we can win. Or Lioness, we can win, rather. But let's turn to now perhaps the stories behind the front pages, a bit more of the detail in all of this. I'm delighted to be joined by the legendary broadcaster John Sargent. And John, there is so much across the papers. Two stories dominate. But perhaps let's start with the news that broke on Friday about Lucy Letby. You've picked out some interesting detail in the Sunday Times.
Yes, the Sunday Times have carried out a full investigation as to what they think happened, and it is, of course, a terrible story. And particularly poignant and grim looking back is a meeting that Letby had with her parents at the hospital in would you believe it, 2016. I mean, it's extraordinary, go as far back as that. And that's where the hospital management apologised to her and her parents. I mean, this is the grotesque moment. And the parents, and she is then told that the doctors who've been investigating it and believe that she was responsible or think she's responsible for murders at this point, these doctors say the management at this meeting that the doctors will be dealt with. This is the management speaking. I mean, it is extraordinary. It took, Sunday Times says, it took almost 2 years after the first 3 murders for the hospital managers to alert the police. Isn't that extraordinary? And one of the consultants says, in the same investigation, 4 or 5 babies who were murdered could still be alive now if they'd taken action then. So the whole thing is just I don't know, it's one of the grimmest stories I think I've ever seen in a newspaper.
It is extraordinary to see how the management almost act to protect this nurse rather than looking into the whistleblowing that was going on. And this in particular, because one of those executives, when he became the executive of the hospital, had said he wanted the most open culture for whistleblowing to start with.
That's it. There's a video of him that's already been broadcast with him saying, you know, this will be what I'll be judged on. And this extraordinary sort of, I don't know, it turns out to be the most absurd pledge that he would always respond. And of course, when it comes to it, he doesn't respond at all properly. And this is the point that in the Sunday Times story, she is then offered a role as a master's degree in nursing and a placement at the Alder Hey Children's Hospital in Liverpool, a very important, very famous hospital in Liverpool. And to think that this killer could not only just be absolved from what she called bullying and accusation. So, no, we must apologise to her. But also give her a chance to continue her career at this top hospital. This is years ago. This is, we're talking about, you know, several years before it became obvious what was going on. So it is a terrible indictment. The Sunday Telegraph says the management must be held account for what they failed these patients in the most grotesque way. It really is. I don't know what these managers are going to say when they finally come before the inquiry, but it's not going to be very convincing, I wouldn't have thought.
No, it really some huge things for the inquiry to get stuck into, and some questions over how much power that inquiry will have. But we must move on, because there is another big story today, and you've picked an interesting contrast here between two stories in two different papers. The Sunday Telegraph carries the story that the Prince has apologised, Prince William this is, apologises for his absence at the World Cup final. But you've contrasted this with the story in the Times, which is talking about how Prince William has embraced his destiny. What's this all about?
Well, what's extraordinary is that you get these contrasting stories really sort of saying that King Charles accepts he's a sort of caretaker looking forward to the real change when William will become king. And you think, oh, well, rather decent of Charles to talk about William in this sort of rather flattering way, that he's not going to be much, but he's just going to be the walk-on before the great man arrives himself, which seems an extraordinary thing to say for a king. But anyway.
Especially for a king who's been so vocal in his long apprenticeship for the job.
That's it, waiting for all these sort of, oh, no, I'm just sort of, I'll be seeing William in the job. But you then think, now, wait a minute, why has this come at this precise moment? Why have the courtiers been saying this, very close sources? And then you contrast that with the Prince William sorry for not going to Australia. And there are several reasons given. One of the ones which I personally don't agree with, which is that, oh, he's worried of his carbon footprint. I don't think so. No. But they think, the other quote, this is from the Mail, saying it's not diplomatically sound, say sources. Of course, what they really mean is that the King has not visited Australia for 9 years. So he wants to make a big, substantial visit to Australia.
And doesn't want to be upstaged by his son.
Well, would he want to be? Now, look, we're speculating, we don't know. But it seems highly likely that, in fact, the King wouldn't be pleased if William went. What if the Lionesses win? And there's a great sort of wonderful, oh, how marvellous, and lots of supporters in Australia for our lovely Lionesses, and also for Prince William. And then, perhaps next year, the King arrives, not such an exciting visit.
Of course,
too difficult.
King Charles has once been upstaged in Australia before, in his first visit after his marriage to Diana. I wonder if echoes of this about it is fascinating to see
all these things,
the mechanics behind how the royals talk to the papers, how the papers sort of show this sort of discussion sort of hiding in plain sight.
That's right. And you think, oh, no, you're being sort of silly, you're sort of making connections that aren't there. But we look back on what has happened in the last 20 or 30 years, and we do see patterns here. We see them, in fact, very worried about their personal standing, very worried about what will happen, very, very worried about how these royal visits will go. And the idea that Prince William would get this perfect visit at this time Oh, no.
Now, we are running out of time. Let's just jump to a quick culture war story, because Graham Linehan, the writer of Father Ted, the IT Crowd, lots of sitcoms, has written in The Telegraph about being cancelled.
Yes, he's written about being cancelled, and the effect of, he in fact did manage to put on a little show in front of the Parliament in Edinburgh. But it's a rather sad sort of piece about how, you know, he wasn't very funny, it was great as a protest, but he wants to get back to comedy. And it's rather sort of, I don't know, it's sort of extraordinary to think he's fed up with protesting. He feels strongly about the trans issues, feels that, you know, that women are being harassed and people are being cancelled because they're holding what he regards as perfectly ordinary views about gender and about sex. So, you know, there's a bitterness there, but also a feeling, can I just get back to my real job, which is writing jokes? It's a kind of, you know, it's the cry of the clown, isn't it?
It is interesting, though, because the venue, of course, that said that he couldn't perform there did point to some of the things that he had said in the past, which do seem pretty untasteful, calling the trans movement a perverted paedophilic movement. He said that almost every central figure in the trans movement is a nonce, that derogatory term, that term for paedophile. I mean, he has been pretty outspoken on this issue in a fairly distasteful way.
Sure, and he's suffered for it. I mean, because people have, as you say, those sorts of remarks have gone down very badly in the media world, in the world that where he wants to work in comedy. He hasn't worked properly in comedy for 5 years. But of course, people think of the sublime series Father Ted, and they desperately want to forgive him.
Yes.
I mean, so, no, he's not a perfect campaigner, no doubt about that, but he is almost a perfect comedy writer.
Just in our last, really, 15 seconds, I want to test your Spanish.
Oh, yes.
This is something in the mail. What does enfermo cuno un loro mean?
Well, thankfully, the mail are preparing us for me may not win in Australia, right? So I happen to know what the enfermo como un loro, sick as a parrot.
And nos lo robaron.
Well, no, this is very important. We were robbed.
We were robbed. Well,
that's what you say.
Potentially words we may well need to stick by. John Sargent, thank you so much for going through the papers this morning. It's been absolutely fascinating.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Dan Stroud, and this is your latest GB News forecast from the Met Office. So we have high pressure to the south and low pressure to the north and west. It kind of leaves the UK in between weather systems. But this area of low pressure is starting to actually push thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain in across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland. Further to the south across England and Wales, largely clear skies. And under those clear skies, we do see some low cloud, mist and fog developing by dawn. Overnight temperatures remaining comfortably in double figures right the way across the board. Now, it's a bright start come Monday morning, with any low cloud, mist and fog across the south quickly lifting and breaking, leaving a pleasant enough day for many across the south. Further north, we have that rain edging in from the west, and that rain will become locally heavy by the course of the afternoon. Temperatures on Monday generally slightly higher than the values we saw on Sunday, with highs of 25 across the south and 21 further north. So that band of cloud and rain continues to sink south on Tuesday, and this kind of sort of sets the scene for the rest of the week as low pressure gradually wins out, turning increasingly showery for all by midweek, and temperatures peaking on Wednesday, particularly across the south and east. Bye for now.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we
get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
John Sargent still joins me in the studio. We've moved up to the breakfast bar this morning. That means we're doing more serious political discussion rather than flicking through the papers.
Certainly higher up.
Yeah. I want to ask you about Nick Gibb. He's a fascinating figure. He's been schools minister for over 12 years. And in this government, we haven't seen many individuals stay in one job for a very long time. We've seen a host of different prime ministers, different chancellors, different home secretaries. Do you think it's important that there are some jobs where an individual has been there through the course?
Well, it can help. I mean, you get some of these jobs where there is prime ministers, where there are so many running through prime minister, and you think, wait a moment, how could they possibly be any good? The thing is, of course, that when they go into a department, the civil service have worked out what they think should be going. There aren't that many options. I mean, I think people imagine, and of course it's part of the system to build up the position of the minister, build up position, particularly of the Secretary of State, so that they're coming in and it'll make a big change. It does in terms of the mood music, does in terms of how they get on with the senior staff. But so much has been long decided, particularly in schools policy. You don't suddenly start doing this and changing that, and I think we should do this.
John, thank you so much for talking through those big subjects, because we're now going to turn to Nick Gibb, the schools minister, who I'm delighted to say can join us now down the line from Westminster. Nick, thank you for joining us this morning. I suppose let's kick off with your big announcement this morning. A new Brit school in Bradford.
Yes, Brit School North, building on the success of the Brit School in South London that has produced people like Adele and Amy Winehouse. They've sold 250 million albums from that school, collectively 15 Brit Awards. And we want the same opportunities for talented young people in the North. This is a 16 to 19 school for 500 students in drama, in dance, in singing, in the technical aspects of theatre and film production. It will open in 3 or 4 years' time, and it's one of the first free schools that we're announcing next week as well.
It's interesting that you've chosen Bradford for the location of this school, given that the government has recently appeared to have rowed back from Northern Powerhouse Rail, abandoning a stop in Bradford. How come you're putting a new crucial school for the arts in a place that is not getting the sort of rail investment that was once promised?
There's a lot of talent in the north. We don't want young people to have to travel to the south. But also in that part of West Yorkshire, we have EMI North in Leeds, we have Channel 4 Leeds, we have in Calderdale the film industry. In Bradford itself, we have the National Museum of Science and Media. So it's a good location for a new Brit school. The creative industries are creating £100 billion of income for our economy, and we have an ambition to increase that by another £50 billion by 2030. The industry needs talent, they need those skills, and they need them in the north as well as the south. So it's important that we have a Brit school north located in Bradford.
I think lots of people would agree with that. People might just question if Bradford should be better connected to places like Liverpool and Manchester and indeed Leeds. But we must move on, because one of the biggest stories this weekend, of course, is the Lucy Letby case. And, of course, an independent inquiry has been committed to by the government. But there are big questions on whether or not this should be a statutory inquiry. Why hasn't the government been clear on this?
Well, look, as soon as the verdict, this is an appalling, horrific case of child murder, and as soon as those verdicts were handed down on Friday, the government announced that there would be a full inquiry into what happened, so that parents can understand what happened. And I've been reading in the paper today and yesterday the stories of the consultants who reported early warnings about what was happening, and the inquiry will look at how those warnings, how concerns that were raised were handled by the hospital, by the trust executive. So all that will be covered by the inquiry. We'll be announcing a chair of that inquiry very soon, and the terms of reference. So we don't know yet what the terms of reference will be. They'll be announced very soon, but what I can assure you is that they will look at all aspects of this right across the health service, so that we can understand what happened, learn lessons, and absolutely prevent anything like this from happening again.
How soon will those terms of reference be announced? Because the families affected by this scandal, the families affected by this murderer, have been worried that this inquiry will be toothless, that it won't have the power, the statutory power, to compel witnesses.
Well, we want the parents to be involved in shaping this inquiry. So the government will be talking to the parents and their representatives to make sure that the inquiry does cover all the aspects of the concerns that they have, and indeed the whole country has, so we can make sure that we learn all the lessons that need to be learned.
Just one final time, will it have the power to compel witnesses?
Well, let's see what the terms of reference have not been published yet. The government is working on those. We've already made a commitment that there will be an inquiry. The government is now working on the terms of reference. We will be talking to the parents to make sure they are involved in shaping this inquiry, and we'll be making announcements on both who will chair it and those terms of reference very soon.
It does seem that there have been huge failings in the hospital, in the trust and in the NHS. Will this inquiry be looking into the clear failures in management, the warning signs that were missed, and indeed the lives that may well have been saved had management acted on the advice, on the whistleblowing of doctors?
Yes, it will, absolutely. That's precisely what the inquiry will be covering. I've read those reports in today's paper and in yesterday's paper, and they're quite shocking. And that's what the inquiry really must get to, really must try and understand. Why warnings, why concerns that were raised, what the governance was of the hospital about these issues, and that's precisely what the inquiry will look at, so we can learn precisely what happened, learn lessons from that, and then prevent it from happening again.
Now, I do want to move on to another huge issue that our audience massively cares about, and that is the small boats crisis, because this week we learned that since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, the number illegally arriving on the shores of the United Kingdom by small boat has risen to 25,000 just during Rishi Sunak's short time as Prime Minister. The government's failing here, isn't it?
Well, the Prime Minister came into office in October. He's given one of his top 5 pledges is to tackle the small boats issue. This current year, year to date, we are 15%. There are 15% fewer small boats crossings than there were at this time last year. There's clearly more to do. We've negotiated with the leadership of the Prime Minister deals with France, with Albania, with Turkey to get the intelligence to understand what's happening so we can tackle it at the root. We passed the illegal migration bill, and that gives the power now that that bill is in statute, it means that anybody arriving in this country illegally cannot have a residency here. So anybody arriving on boats now will be sent back to where they came from or to a third-party safe country such as Rwanda. So the Prime Minister, this is a top priority for the Prime Minister, and actually we are achieving some success, but there's clearly a lot more to do, and that's what's the topmost of the Prime Minister's agenda and the government's agenda at the moment.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Let's begin now with Sir Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary and Conservative MP for South Swindon. Sir Robert, thank you so much for joining us this morning on the programme. I suppose we must kick off with the just astounding news in this Lucy Letby case. The government seems to be unclear on the terms of reference for this inquiry, this promised inquiry. The government's committed to an inquiry, but I was speaking to Nick Gibb just moments ago. He wouldn't say that the government should have full statutory powers to compel witnesses. Why is the government being ambiguous here?
Well, I think that it's really important that any inquiry has the requisite powers to ensure that all material is brought before it and all appropriate witnesses are brought before it. We know that inquiries under the 2005 Act have that power, and it does seem to me in a case like this that in order to establish maximum confidence, then giving the inquiry those powers would, I think, be a wise thing to do. Now, it doesn't need to be necessarily a judge chairing it. I think it needs to be somebody who has experience of the management of a lot of information. Could even be somebody with a clinical background, but it's got to be somebody who has independence, a strong reputation, and the ability to make sure that all documents are before them.
I'm trying to think why the government might not be committing at this stage to a statutory inquiry. One argument could be that it's just slower to get off the ground. It would need to be passed perhaps by MPs. That would slow things down. Do you think that might be factoring into their considerations?
Well, statutory inquiries do take a little longer to set up, and if a judge is to be appointed, then the government has to consult with the senior judiciary, in particular the Lord Chief Justice, before, for example, a serving judge or indeed a retired judge can be approached, and therefore these things do take time. But as I've said, I don't think it necessarily needs to be a judge. It needs to be somebody with that requisite experience, and very often somebody, a senior clinician or somebody with a health background could be an appropriate person, as long as they have the ability to manage all the detailed facts and documents in this case, and crucially that ability to summon for documents and witnesses.
It is astonishing that in the last 30 years or so, we've now seen 3 cases within the NHS of healthcare professionals murdering their patients. We saw the angel of death, Beverly Allett, in the early 1990s. We, of course, saw Harold Shipman as well, who was found out and sentenced in the year 2000, I believe. And now, of course, we have Lucy Letby. It seems that there's almost a pattern of behaviour here and lessons that have not been learned.
Well, look, Tom, I think it's really important that we all remember that the vast majority of professionals within the NHS, and indeed everybody working there, do a superb job for us all. And it is tragic and appalling that where one person like Letby and the ones you've mentioned is able to have such of an autonomy, if you like, a control over situations, that then murder and mayhem can ensue. I think from what we're seeing, the emerging reports about this case do reveal that a number of professionals had deep concerns, and there were clearly complaint procedures and a number of processes that were undertaken within the NHS prior to the arrest of Letby, and that it clearly has to be the focus now of the inquiry, to understand precisely what went wrong, why it is that people who were blowing the whistle don't seem to have been properly listened to. And as you say, to get this cultural change that we need, I think, instead of an NHS that is unduly defensive about everything, bearing in mind the risk of litigation and damages, which we know medical negligence, clinical negligence damages are running to the billions of pounds, much more of a sort of black box approach to responsibility, which we see, for example, in the airline industry, where, you know, where mistakes, where things go wrong, instead of a finger-pointing culture, it's an openness and a belief and a dedication to try and make sure that those mistakes are not repeated again. And I think it's increasingly that approach that we need to foster and encourage in the NHS, supporting clinicians, supporting all our caring staff, but at the same time acting truly in the public interest.
Now, we're hearing from the government that killers will be compelled to attend their sentencing. That's something that we're expecting now in the King's speech in the autumn. But that's several months away. Is there anything that could be done to force Lucy Letby to attend her own sentencing? For, as we understand it right now, she's intent not to.
Well, I know, and I think sadly the court's hands are tied at the moment. I mean, my suggestion had been to make sure that there was a live link beamed into the cell, either sound or sound and pictures, to ensure that Letby had nowhere to hide and that she, in effect, has to listen to what the judge is saying about the case. And most importantly, the victim personal statements, those impact statements that will really bring home, I think, to the wider world the appalling, devastating impact of the loss of these innocent children, these innocent babies, have had upon dozens of families. That is why I think the government is right to act. There are a couple of options. I hear indeed about proposals for the King's speech in November. There's a bill currently before Parliament, a victims bill. That perhaps could be amended by the government as it goes through the Commons. It's still in the Commons stages. Legislation takes time. You know, Tom, I've dealt with a lot of legislation myself and got it through Parliament. It does take many months. But I'm glad to see that the government is taking the necessary action and trying to strike the balance between stopping, the compulsion of the defendant becoming the centrepiece of attention, but making sure that defendants are being made to face the consequences of their appalling crimes.
No, I think beaming that sentencing into her cell and perhaps having a camera in that cell sounds like an excellent suggestion. I hope people are listening to those suggestions from you, Sir Robert. But let's move on now to the issue of the ECHR. This is something that dare I say it, is providing a dividing line within the Conservative Party. We hear that a third of Cabinet want out, 2/3 want to stay in. The government itself seems to have this peculiar position that it hasn't made up its mind on this issue until the Rwanda ruling comes back, perhaps not until the end of the year. Your party's in a mess over this.
Look, I think the vast majority of Conservative MPs support our continuing membership of the Convention. It was British Conservative lawyers who wrote it with the express support of Sir Winston Churchill. We should be very proud of our role in being one of the guarantors of peace and freedom and fundamental rights in Europe. This is all about, I think, the not just the history, but the future of our party as well, in making sure that we are outward looking, that we understand the impact that withdrawal would have upon our role in the world and how people perceive the United Kingdom. And I think that leaving the ECHR would be a grave mistake. It's not serious politics, Tom. You know, I still don't follow precisely what leaving the ECHR would do when it comes to things like the Rwanda policy. The Court of Appeal didn't say that sending people to a third country was unlawful or in breach of the ECHR. What they wanted was more evidence that Rwanda was a safe country. Now, we define safe country in domestic law. The Lord Chief Justice thought that the government had provided enough evidence. The other two judges disagreed. That's what the issue boils down to now, and that's what I think we should all be focusing upon. I support the policy, absolutely support it, but I don't think that debates about the ECHR help anybody. It's a massive red herring, and we should move on and focus on what's important when it comes to this vital issue of small boats.
Was it not the case that those individuals who were sitting on that plane, that original plane that was ready to take off to Rwanda, who were then taken off the plane one by one, that was under rulings from the ECHR?
Well, that was an interim order under what's called Rule 39. It's only an interim order. When you look at the terms of the treaty that we signed, the convention, the United Kingdom is bound by final judgments of the court affecting the UK. And you know, Tom, the number of judgments every year involving the UK is tiny. It's on the fingers of one hand, as opposed to, say, you know, Russia, formerly a member, which was being found in breach hundreds of times, as you would expect a regime like Putin's to be found in breach. I really think that, there's a world of difference between the Strasbourg court and its role and the role that the Luxembourg court had when we were members of the EU, that clearly had a direct effect upon the applicability of law in the UK. Totally different roles. I think the best way forward for the UK is to continue being a strong voice for further reform. We did it 10 or so years ago by dealing with the backlog of cases. We can do it again. And I think that, talk about leaving just diminishes the leading role that our country has played, particularly in light of the importance of unity in the face of Putin's aggression in Ukraine. I can't think of a worse time for an issue like this to be raised. And that's why I think we should put the issue firmly back in the box, focus upon the practicalities, and support the Prime Minister on his initiatives with Albania, and indeed I hope with Turkey and other countries, that I think will really have an effect upon the small boats crisis.
Well, Sir Robert, you certainly have strong views there. There are plenty of your colleagues who would say the opposite. I fear that for your sake, the box may not well, the issue may well not be put back in that box over the next year or so. We'll continue to follow it, though, and thank you so much for your time.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey programme. Now, The former head of professional standards for the Australian government's offshore processing scheme in Nauru is a man named Oliver Lawrence, and he joins me now in the studio. And Oliver, thank you so much for coming in, because I think a lot of people are absolutely fascinated with Australian policy, what was known as Operation Sovereign Borders under Tony Abbott. First of all, can you just explain what was your role in how that policy was delivered?
Yeah, so my role, in essence, was to support asylum seekers and refugees with complaints they made about the system we had in place. So Nauru was a very complex facility with a lot of infrastructure, and we had a lot of Australian expats there from Broad Spectrum, Wilson Security and Australian Border Force, looking after the care, the safety and security of asylum seekers and refugees. And my job was to respond to complaints they had and to implement additional policies where we thought we needed to provide additional care and support. And ultimately, if we did things wrong, hold our staff accountable.
Now, it's a fascinating case study, because when Tony Abbott became Prime Minister of Australia in 2013, he said he wanted to stop the boats. It was one of his big election slogans. And his policy was turn back. Against what some people would say was international law, to international condemnation, he turned boats back, tugged them back to Nauru. But I suppose there was a lot more to it than simply turning back the boats.
Hugely. You know, it was a very complex policy. In terms of 2013, came in with a primary mandate to turn back the boats and stop them. We were losing people at sea, and nobody wants to see men, women and children dying in the oceans off the Australian coast. So this policy came in 2013, Operation Sovereign Borders. We established Nauru and Manus Island as two of the processing centres, and the message was quite clear. If you want to make a trip on a boat to Australia and try to enter illegally, you will never get to arrive into Australia. You'll be sent to either Nauru and Manus Island, where your claims will then be processed, but you will never make Australian shore. It was incredibly complex. The infrastructure that was placed into both those remote areas was in the billions. And then on top of that, you've got the staff and the specialists supporting people with both medical concerns. You've then got the infrastructure behind education and social and welfare of these people, because we have to remember there are hundreds of millions of displaced people around the world. Australia recognised that, but equally they wanted people to come through a legitimate, lawful process in terms of applying through a third-party country.
So these enormous facilities that were established outside of mainland Australian territory, how many billions of Australian dollars are we talking, and what sort of infrastructure was running there?
So it was billions and billions. It was a huge commitment by the Australian government to make sure the policy was effective, and ultimately it worked. It stopped the boats. And so you're looking at sort of various different centres to support different cohorts, single adult females, families, single adult males. Everything was covered to make sure people's needs and expectations were met. And ultimately then you'd have a rotation of staff that would come in and off the island to make sure that care and support was provided 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I had never worked with so many remarkably talented individuals supporting people who'd come from very, very distressing backgrounds.
There have been complaints about the conditions in these facilities. There have been many news stories that some of the conditions were not up to scratch, that there was illness, that all sorts of perhaps unpalatable things. Was that your experience?
No. Whenever you're implementing a policy of that size and scale and that complexity, there's always going to be problems along the way. There's no denying that at all. There were incidents of public disorder. People were frustrated with the system, frustrated with the process. So what we found is by having an open system, people could come and go from these centres as they pleased. They weren't prisons. They were provided with incredible accommodation. They often wouldn't allow our staff to go in and tend to them and support them, because obviously those that were really against the policy wanted to make sure that they could get out the images which would be graphic enough to demonstrate that this was bad and it was not in the interest of these individuals, when it was totally the opposite.
It's interesting, though, because it wasn't just about the idea of turning back the boats. These are processing facilities, and I suppose some of those who went through the processing facilities were determined to be genuine refugees. What lessons do we have to learn from that?
The key to the Australian policy, with several different segments, it was understanding that we needed a deterrent. Otherwise, people were going to continue to arrive into Australia. People then needed a lawful route to go through to be able to come to Australia, apply like other people do in terms of immigration. The number one job of government is to protect its borders. If we fundamentally can't get that right, we are in a serious pickle. And the British government has been grappling with this for a couple of years. And then you've got the piece around the enforcement and the investigation of the people smugglers. That that is where the efforts need to be focused so that the trade stops. So if people can see that it's going to be ineffective in getting on a boat, which isn't generally fit for purpose, overcrowded, not enough life jackets, etc., it's very dangerous. So the messaging was very clear too. Not only did we have this turn back the boat policy and we had Nauru and Manus Island, we had the communication structure to allow people to know that if you come here, if you make this attempt, you're not going to be successful and you're going to be processed through these third-party countries.
Interestingly, though, perhaps one of those strands that you just said, that the legal routes, the ability to apply lawfully, that's something that the Conservative Party doesn't seem to be exploring so much in this country. That sounds more like Labour Party policy.
We've got to be, I think, very mindful that at the moment, as of 2022, there are about 100 million displaced people around the world as a result of conflict and persecution. Some of that conflict we've been actively involved in, and there's a level of accountability on us as a Western nation, as in terms of the UK government, in supporting some of these people try to find a place of safety. But they need a lawful route to do that. So I think we've got to find the happy medium in implementing a policy which shows a deterrent for those that wish to break the law and support those who wish to go through a process lawfully. And it's about trying to find that sort of relationship with the French and the Belgians and this European context. That's one thing Australia didn't have, the complexities of Europe. Australia was able to drive this policy because it had no real pushback from anyone other than some sort of very vocal charity groups. But the UK has Europe, which is not being overly supportive and not helpful in terms of designing a successful policy.
I wonder if that's where the comparisons, therefore, break down. Australia sort of had no rich, powerful countries in its immediate vicinity saying, no, you can't take boats back to here. It could sort of ride roughshod over the views and ideas of the countries around it in a way that perhaps we can't do with France without some pretty serious economic consequences.
Well, yeah, and I think with this and serious economic investment, you look at the Rwanda setup. Have we really researched, around that particular policy? At the moment, for me, it feels very band-aid. It feels to me like there's an election cycle coming, and we're going to put things into place quickly to show the electorate that we're doing something. But are we really doing something? Are we really making the bold decisions? Are we really making the bold moves? Because, as you said, under Rishi Sunak's premiership, 25,000 have arrived. He's only been in power a very short time. So clearly, the messaging that he's getting out is not working. You've got to be fair, firm and decisive with the policy. That is the key to success.
Well, Oliver Lawrence, it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, so much more nuance within that policy than I think many people had initially thought. Well, that's it for the programme today. Thank you to Oliver. Thank you to all of my guests. I'll be back here next week, next Sunday, for more of the one-stop shop for all your political news on a Sunday, The Camilla Tominey Show.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Dan Stroud and this is your latest GB News forecast from the Met Office. So we have high pressure to the south and low pressure to the north and west. It kind of leaves the UK in between weather systems. But this area of low pressure is starting to actually push thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain in across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland. Further to the south across England and Wales, largely clear skies. And under those clear skies, we do see some low cloud, mist and fog developing by dawn. Overnight temperatures remaining comfortably in double figures right the way across the board. Now, it's a bright start come Monday morning, with any low cloud, mist and fog across the south quickly lifting and breaking, leaving a pleasant enough day for many across the south. Further north, we have that rain edging in from the west, and that rain will become locally heavy by the course of the afternoon. Temperatures on Monday generally slightly higher than the values we saw on Sunday, with highs of 25 across the south and 21 further north. So that band of cloud and rain continues to sink south on Tuesday, and this kind of sort of sets the scene for the rest of the week as low pressure gradually wins out, turning increasingly showery for all by midweek, and temperatures peaking on Wednesday, particularly across the south and east. Bye for now.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom. England have missed out on World Cup glory, losing the final to Spain 1-0. The Lionesses came agonisingly close to becoming the first England senior side to win the trophy since the men's team in 1966. The King praised their skill, determination and team spirit, and the Prime Minister said while it wasn't to be, they've already secured their legacy as game changers. Despite the loss, Jeannie Allard, a member of the original Lionesses team of 1972, still has high hopes for the future.
I think that whole of England is very emotional at the moment. It could have come home. Spain was just that little bit better, if I have to be honest. We should have just done take the chances what we had. It wasn't to be. It will come home eventually.
Elsewhere, the British Medical Association's calling for hospital managers to be regulated in a similar way to medical staff. The call comes in the wake of Lucy Letby's conviction. The BMA says it's deeply worrying that consultants who repeatedly raised concerns about the former nurse weren't listened to. Letby, who was found guilty of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 others, has indicated she won't attend her sentencing tomorrow. Former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland says she should be forced to listen.
My suggestion had been to make sure that there was a live link beamed into the cell, either sound or sound and pictures, to ensure that Letby had nowhere to hide and that she, in effect, has to listen to what the judge is saying about the case. And most importantly, the victim personal statements, those impact statements that will really bring home, I think, to the wider world, the appalling, devastating impact of the loss of these innocent children, these innocent babies, have had upon dozens of families.
A new Brit school set to open in Bradford in West Yorkshire. The government's confirmed it'll be based on the award-winning performing arts Brit School in South London. It helped launch the careers of some of Britain's best-known artists and actors, including Adele, Amy Winehouse and Tom Holland. And finally, Russia's Luna 25 spacecraft has crashed on the moon. A rocket carrying the craft launched on the 11th of August, the country in a space race against India, whose Chandrayaan-3 is due to land on the satellite's south pole this week. This was Moscow's first mission to the moon in 47 years. The failed attempt is a blow to the country, which was hoping to return with the first samples of frozen water. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's over to Free Speech Nation.
Comedy legend Graham Linehan's gig is cancelled twice at the Edinburgh Fringe. A woman is sacked from the Open University for questioning gender ideology, and Snow White becomes a feminist girl boss. This is Free Speech Nation. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to Free Speech Nation. I'm Nick Dixon, filling in for Saint Andrew Doyle. Yeah, he is a saint. Everyone's laughing at that, but it's factually true. Our glorious leader may be away, but it's still going to be a great show, because coming up, we talked to the co-founder of Comedy Unleashed about that cancelled Graham Linehan gig. We'll hear from the law teacher who was sacked from the Open University, and there are some shocking details in that story. We'll also be debating Snow White and the state of feminism. Can't see myself getting in any trouble there. And, of course, my fantastic panel will be answering questions from our wonderful studio audience, which is you guys. And my studio guests tonight are 2 comedians I'm affectionately calling Gammon and Gammoner. They love it. I didn't ask. It's Francis Foster and Paul Cox. Thanks for doing this, lads. How are we feeling?
I'm feeling good, mate. I'm delighted to be here for your debut, Nick.
Thanks. Yeah, first time I've done FSN as host. And I said, let's make sure it's all straight white men. All right, that was